Welcome back to the WalaWay, ladies and gentlemen, and today I want to discuss something that's been on my mind since the NBA Finals were about to start. Right now, we are a day before Game 6, so this took me a little bit longer than I anticipated, but as the Toronto Raptors are possibly on the verge of winning their first finals, being in their first finals in NBA history, Kawhi Leonard has assumed the role of Canada's prodigal son. Now, some things need explaining. As is very common in sports, many fans and pundits have a poor short-term memory and are plagued with the bandwagoning phenomena. So today, what we see is, or before the finals started, many of the people who are now singing Kawhi's praises had to, in turn, ridicule the Spurs and point out all the mistakes they made, which led to Kawhi wanting a trade in the first place. I believe a better approach to understanding this situation is examining why both sides behaved the way they did, and then figuring out what went wrong. Now, I'm going to have to be very honest. I am a millennial, and Kawhi Leonard is also a millennial. I want to examine and analyze this situation from the lens of a millennial. So, for example, we have to take into consideration millennial behaviors and tendencies. This is a must. So here I have a list of qualities most commonly associated with millennials. Number 1, millennials do not like hierarchies. They prefer flat organizations. Number 2, millennials appreciate empathy and personal connection. Number 3, they care about the team above all else. Number 4, they do not like conflict. Number 5, they are less trusting than the previous generations. Number 6, they are prone to jump from job to job. And number 7, they prefer communication through tech. Now, I have been a Kawhi fan since he came into the league because I am a lifelong Spurs fan. And Kawhi's commitment to playing defense and his no-nonsense attitude off the court made most Spurs fans fall in love with him. However, watching him give interviews and interact with others, it became very clear and evident that he was introverted and possibly socially awkward. So, we have a case of someone who is not only a millennial, but most likely an introvert.
I'm a fun guy. Obviously, I love the game of basketball. It's just more questions you have to ask me in order for me to tell you about myself. I just can't give you a whole spiel. I don't even know where you're sitting at.
And again, this is going to be very important when we examine his history and what happened between him and the Spurs. Now, before the drama unraveled, the relationship between team and player seemed great. Only a few years into the league, Kawhi was making it deep into the playoffs. He made it to the finals twice. He won a championship and was crowned the MVP of the finals in 2014. He was the apparent heir to Tim Duncan, and not coincidentally, they both seem to have similar character traits and personalities. Now, everybody knows what happened. 2017, the Western Conference Finals had begun, and he was injured by Zaza Pachulia. And then during the 2017-2018 season, turmoil slowly started brewing as a result of the earlier injury. The tension centered around the fact that the Spurs gave Kawhi ample time to rest and recover, while their doctors had also cleared him to play. However, Kawhi claimed he was still in pain and did not want to return. The Spurs, who were on the verge of another playoffs, needed answers, so the veteran players called for a players-only meeting where they asked him plainly if he was going to return. There was tension building before the meeting as the Spurs were making it clear to the media that Kawhi had been cleared by their doctors. Many who know the Spurs claim that there is no way that the senior Spurs players would have called for a players-only meeting without the permission and blessings of their head coach, Greg Popovich. Thus, in Kawhi's eyes, the organization had turned against him and he could no longer trust the Spurs. Now, before we examine the millennial values I listed above, I need to make it very clear that I do not put blame squarely on one side. I really believe both sides could have handled themselves better, but for the sake of this argument, we want to understand what the Spurs did wrong and how they did not understand millennial values. As the team and players were increasingly showing their frustration with Kawhi and letting others know that he was cleared to play, they were slowly engaging in a tug-of-war between their own interest and the interest of Kawhi's camp. Thus, they were violating the principle of millennials do not like conflict. Being an introvert, Kawhi was already prone to avoiding people and especially conflicts. When the situation with the Spurs became tense, he was sure to break off communication with the Spurs, which is exactly what he did. So let us not also forget principle number 1 listed above. Millennials do not like hierarchies. They prefer flat organizations. As a Spurs fan, I can't help but cracking a smile when I read this principle, because most Spurs fans will understand the Spurs are an organization that has a clear hierarchy, and understandably so. As a small market team in San Antonio, and as a team with one of the most successful track records in modern sports, it is their hierarchy and their structure that has offered them their competitive edge and advantage. It is the structure and discipline which allows the organization of the San Antonio Spurs to find gems deep in the draft, pick up guys no other teams want, and then turn them into starters and champions. But I digress. Any organization that is built like this will want direct communication and clear reporting from all their constituents. As the drama with Kawhi was unveiling, the Spurs had a hard time getting hold of him. This was known. And they were not able to get answers directly through him. This takes us to the next principle, communication through technology. Now, I don't know for sure that Kawhi prefers this method of communication. I've even heard that he is not very active on social media. But what I do know is that the Spurs were not understanding why they could not get a face-to-face meeting with Kawhi Leonard, as they were accustomed to with their older players. As many of us have probably experienced, millennials prefer to voice their opinions, fight, and even solve their fights using social media and text messages. Not only that, Kawhi seems introverted. The Spurs were accustomed to players who were not millennials or who were not cultured in America. Tim Duncan is from the U.S. Virgin Islands. Manu Ginobili is from Argentina and played professional ball in Italy. Tony Parker is from France, and he was playing professional ball in France as a 16-year-old against grown men. None of the aforementioned people had an easy route to the NBA, and I would say that them being yelled and belittled from time to time, all in the spirit of becoming better players by Coach Pop, would be a vast improvement compared to what they faced back home or overseas. The point is, the Spurs were used to an international flavor comprised by individuals who were not very millennial in their behavior. So having to deal with a star like Kawhi was something they were not really prepared for. Another principle that I mentioned above, they appreciate empathy and personal connection, would also hold true for the above mentioned stars. And the Spurs are generally good at connecting with their players. But in Kawhi's case, the empathy needed to come in the form of trusting that he felt he was not ready to play, and he was not ready to start playing again, and giving him the space and time he needed to recover. Once the Spurs players decided to hold Kawhi accountable during their meeting, once their staff made it clear that he was cleared to play, Kawhi probably felt that there was no empathy. Now, another interesting millennial characteristic that we mentioned above is they are prone to jump from job to job. Many could not understand why he was leaving one of the most storied organizations in NBA history. He was also leaving the most money he could make as a free agent. But in the mind of most millennials, money is second. The values anybody holds has to be the top most value. And Kawhi's values were trust, empathy, etc. And these were violated in his eyes. Since he was no longer comfortable with the company or organizational culture, he felt it was time to leave. He probably felt isolated and lonely, and because his values were being compromised, he knew it was time to look somewhere else. The money was not important. In closing, it's obvious and clear to me that the Spurs could have handled this better. They did not understand the new generation of player that they had gotten, and this guy was clearly on his way to becoming a superstar. However, I don't think they made all the mistakes, and without going into Kawhi's mistakes or the mistakes of Kawhi's side, they definitely could have handled themselves better. They were not communicating effectively, efficiently. A lot of rumors point out to the fact that he already had made up his mind that he wanted out. He wanted to play for a big market. We see the success he's had in Toronto, but the rumors do not die that he is interested in going to California. But nonetheless, this is just an example to learn from in history, that a successful organization who has an amazing track record in professional sports had faltered just a little bit. And I don't blame them, because they are, for me, the most storied franchise in sports history. They're a small market team, great success, great at drafting people, great at hiring people. But just something to think about, food for thought for most organizations that deal with millennials. We are a different beast. We have our own values and principles that make us tick. So for any organization that wants to thrive while working with millennials, they need to know what we're about and understand us. So thank you guys again. Leave your comments below. Let me know what you guys thought and who you put the blame on or what you think happened.